Welcome to the Conditional Release Program, a podcast that delves into the netherworlds of cults, crims and con artists. We don't like these people and it shows, and we believe the best way to expose them is to hold them up to a harsh light, point our index fingers in their general direction and mock them mercilessly, take them down a peg or two until they cease to exist in any other form than the shit on our shoes. I'm Jack the Insider, otherwise known as Peter Hoisted for tax purposes.
And I'm Joel Hill, and this week we are going to look at the Dorito dust-covered Mountain Dew drinking world of incels. Incel stands for involuntary celibate, and I've been looking at these guys for a while. I did a couple of articles on Medium, you can find them online, because these are really interesting people. I've actually find myself feeling quite sorry for them.
Don't feel sorry for these unloved turds, Joel. So you can't get laid? So what? Life's full of disappointments, and it's not an excuse to be a fuckwit, and certainly not to be a terrorist. We're talking subculture here. And what about other subcultures? Like, I don't know, cricketers, line dancers, antiquers, vintage car enthusiasts. We don't look at these groups and say, well, most of them are all right, but there are a couple over there that are plotting mass murder and mayhem. Because that's what incels do at the pointy end. And the rest of them need to be told in no uncertain terms that having a blue tinge around your scrape, having a couple of cods that look like blood plums is not an excuse to promote and barrack forced sexual violence against women. And back in the old days, we'd have this lot off in a circus and pay tuppence halfpenny to look at them in their ghastliness and laugh like fuck at them.
Yeah, all right, Jack. I can see how this is going to go. But look, they are sad bastards, and while they can be a little bit unpleasant at times, it comes from a dark and lonely place.
You've gone soft, Joel. Soft, liberal, navel-gazing, empathy-laced, and wrong. And let's all think about what the mass murderers are actually feeling. And maybe they're feeling pain. Maybe they have emotional pain. Maybe we get them a cup of tea and a fucking biscuit.
Yeah, okay. You're not wrong. I mean, maybe I'm on the wrong side of history here, but as it stands, for various reasons, I feel for them. But you might change my mind on this one.
All right, Joel, that's enough about our unfuckable mates. We will get back to them later. But now it's time for this. It's the Conditional Release Program's weekly news.
In the seemingly endless saga of the US presidential election, which was meant to be done and dusted a few weeks ago, baseless claims of electoral fraud are somehow becoming more baseless as time goes on. The Trump lawyers have become famous for squirming under oath and generally half-assing their attempts to get the Oval Office back into their trusted orange hands. This entire thing is fucked, and I hope it's over soon.
No, you're wrong about that too, Joel. So we're basically... Well, this is actually better than a Biden landslide. I mean, this way, Trump loses every day. He's lost every day since the 3rd of November. And some days he actually loses harder than he did on the 3rd of November.
And several times.
When a swing state certifies or another one of his silly-ass claims is hurled out of court. Yep. And this week's highlight was a TV interview with now you see and now you don't member of the Trump legal team, Sidney Powell, who suggested zombie Hugo Chavez in cahoots with the CIA had bribed the Republican governor of Georgia, Brian Kemp, a Trump acolyte, and his Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, also a Trump acolyte, to install the menu voting machines and shift votes from one side to the other.
Yeah, but Jack, how good is that company name? Dominion? I mean, are you trying to trigger people? It's fucking ominous.
Look, Powell's claims were so nutty that Lord of the Fruitcakes, Rudy Giuliani, sent her packing from the Trump team. And Powell's performance made Giuliani's presser at the Four Seasons in Philly 2 weeks back. Not the hotel, but the landscaping business over the road from the crematorium. Turn left at the dildo shop and there you are. Look like the Gettysburg Address. If you're too crazy to sit in the same room as Rudy, maybe the only room you should sit in has mattresses strapped to the walls. And meanwhile, the district court in Georgia awaits Sidney Powell's filings, as do we all. Where to next? Aliens from beyond the moon gathering up Nevada ballots with their powerful mandibles? It's anyone's guess.
Well, Sidney Powell has also been promising to release the Kraken in her own explosive set of affidavits and wild, baseless claims of election fraud. Sidney has also typically, started a fundraising campaign in the name of defending the Republic. One would assume this is in order to fund her lawsuits and feed this kraken of hers, but it's probably just a slush fund for when she loses her license to practice law and becomes suddenly unemployed. Now, I am keenly awaiting the remarks from the judge because these guys are not enjoying this bullshit process. So far, she has managed to, in textbook Trump legal style, misspell her star witness's name not once but twice, according to Will Sommer on Twitter. I mean, come on, fucking guys, you're just a cartoon at this point. She keeps using this headshot she has, which looks like she's posting for a horror film, like a deer in the headlights, like Jack Nicholson's about to stab her in the face.
She's just seen the big guy with the axe, and
that's it,
coming towards her, and that's what it looks like. It's
John Jarrett is around the corner, like fucking hell.
I mean, you if you had that on your driver's license, you'd give it the ass.
Absolutely. Honestly, as days go on, it is getting harder to believe that she is not a George Soros-funded performance artist who is just taking the piss out of all of us. Because, will she release this fucking kraken? And if so, what does a kraken do in a court of law? Does it have its own license to practice? Is it a witness? I mean, who's keeping it wet? I mean, I am getting more questions than answers here, Jack.
Look, throwing an enormous fictitious squid into the story can only add some meat to the bones of this wonderful post-election phase.
Yeah, fuck. I mean, I like my calamari deep fried with a side of mayo, but Powell's serve is just a little bit of a mouthful at this point. I mean, I think the self-described kraken releaser, that's literally what she calls herself, is going to have a very strange Thanksgiving this year and a very short legal career after this. But who bloody knows? I mean, these assholes just never seem to go away. But in other news and more local news, Gladys Berejiklian has told us what we already know, which is when governments hurl around great sacks of public money, known as pork barreling, you get some pork on your fork, everyone does it. Ethics is a county in England. There's nothing to see here, right, guys?
We all love Gladys. It's actually the law. Anyone who doesn't love Gladys, and I don't mean a Daryl way, but the compulsory love and deep and abiding respect for Gladys for doing as little as possible in New South Wales to prevent pandemic mega deaths. There are some pretty big fines around for not loving Gladys. Thank you, Gladys. I love you, and I think you may have stepped deep into Sir Robert Askin territory today, and that can only be a good thing. And back in Asco's day, you could buy the Premier for as little as $10,000 a week, which was a bargain. And now it's costing $252 million. Through the local government grants program, which, when you adjust for inflation, it's bugger all more than ASCO got in the kickbacks. It's the cost of good government in New South Wales, a mere $250 million a year. I think it's money well spent. And not spent, actually, just shoveled out of a fucking big dump truck to anyone with Liberal Party connections with their hands out. Well done, Gladys. Well done, everyone.
Yeah, we love Gladys Berejiklian here at the Conditional Release Program because she could never do or say anything wrong, even if she does like to kill koalas in her spare time.
But we can't waste any more time moaning about dead koalas, Joe. We have to kick those marsupial corpses, cuddly as they are, out of the way and move on. Pull the rubber gloves on and stick our fingers deep into the anal cavity of the incel movement in our deeper dive. So, Joel, you've got the gloves on. Tell me, what's an incel?
Well, we've talked a lot about red pills in this podcast, but this one is the black pill. And while the red pill shows you this alternate reality where vaccines turn you into a chicken and Donald Trump is fighting the kiddie fiddlers and the deep state, and of course Pete Evans is somehow clever, the black pill is one of nihilism and complete despair. It's meant to reveal the idea that some people just never stood a chance from the start. And only good-looking and neurotypical people will ever find success in this world, and the incels are simply subhuman genetic fuck-ups that should never have been born. And this is one of the reasons why incels veers dark. It is a dark topic.
Dark topic. I mean, incel stands for involuntary celibate, for those who don't know. It is what it says on the box. It's people who are celibate, not voluntarily, and not very happy about it.
Yeah, the term incel was actually created by a woman, but incel culture has very much slipped away from the intended roots of this sort of love shy, anxious around the opposite sex, hey, let's talk about how hard dating is, and become this fucking monster before us. It's responsible for a lot of atrocities. Incels will argue that women can't be incels because they are the gatekeepers of sex. But femcells absolutely do exist. They often gripe, femcells is the female incel, and they often gripe about not being taken seriously by women and men in general because they're not conventionally attractive. And, the halo effect and lookism and that sort of stuff.
Yes.
And they also find themselves being used sexually, like they're not keepers. So contrary to what male incels think, because they're sexually obsessed, this is an awful experience. Being used sucks. And incels simply think that these femcels are just really picky because, of course, picking your partner is like, such a fucking ridiculous thing to do, right? Like, take what you can get. Oh, fuck off. So the basic truth of whatever they do, these guys can't get laid. And not only that, but some of them, it's like not just like a dry patch. Like some of them get past 30 or even 50 years old without hugging or kissing a woman in intimacy ever.
Well, look, if we're going to go into the dark corners of this idiot brigade, what is the go with terrorist attacks? Because that's what they've been responsible for. There have been several, and they seem to idolise the others that remain, idolise those that commit atrocities.
They do. You've looked into this. What's the go?
Well, in 2014, the Isla Vista attack in California left 6 victims dead, and the perpetrator having committed suicide by firearm. And he was just 22 years of age. He gave himself no hope of ever having a sexual relationship with anyone.
He's just a pup.
Yeah, he's just a kid. He stabbed 3 men to death in his apartment as they arrived, one by one. Jeez. And then he drove to a University of California sorority house. He couldn't get in, so he fired shots into the building, killing 2 young women and severely injuring another before taking off in his car, pursued by police. He was shot in the hip, and then his vehicle basically crashed, and by the time the police got to him, he'd blown his head off. But in the meantime, before he committed these atrocities, he posted a manifesto of a kind on YouTube. And just by the way, the clip is long gone, but don't YouTube have questions to answer in terms of the curation and moderation of this sort of stuff?
100%. Absolutely. And to this day, so many things that they just need to, The algorithm encourages people to watch it. Yes,
that's right. And we're not just talking about terrorist sort of offences. We're also talking about, sort of hard right-wing ideologies.
100%.
And violent urging and all this sort of stuff that YouTube posts without apology. And
it's clicks.
It's not as if this is a free speech argument to them. It really is just we couldn't be bothered hiring people to curate and moderate our library.
And it makes us money. Let's face it, extremism, rabbit holes of obsession, these sort of things keep people glued to these videos with mid-roll ads. And that money goes to assholes like fucking Del Bigtree and various absolute scumbag grifters. Yes, I have a serious sticking point when it comes to the way YouTube does not moderate this shit.
I've got some, they've got some questions to answer, certainly, and they should
really
be dealing with this stuff. But the Isla Vista attacker, I just want to go through some of his manifesto. I'll give our listeners a bit of an insight into what these people are really angry about and what they're prepared to do. And so this is his quote. "It was all fueled by my wish to punish everyone who is sexually active because I concluded that it wasn't fair that other people were able to experience sex while I have been denied it all my life. I will arm myself with deadly weapons and wage a war against all women and the men they are attracted to. The first phase will represent my vengeance against all of the men who have had pleasurable sex lives while I've had to suffer. The second phase will represent my war on women. I will punish all females for the crime of depriving me of sex."
The crime.
Yes, it's a crime, and he's 22 years of age. And the first thing we notice there is the unrestrained depictions of violence or the willingness to commit violent acts. And the other thing that we notice there too is the basis of it is an attack on women, but there are also attacks on men. It's essentially an attack on everyone with a focus perhaps on women.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing that's interesting with this guy, the fact that he went men and women, because most incel violence, whether it's in practice or whether it's idealized, is targeted toward women. And I mean, this guy stabbed people, shooting and stabbing. I don't know, look, I'm not an expert in this, but I see stabbing as being a very close and intimate way of taking someone's life. And this guy clearly was at peace with it because he did it more than once. And that's just...
That's absolutely right. I mean, stabbing shows great intent.
It really
great
does.
intent to cause serious injury, if not death. And
Do
he
it 3
did.
times, mate.
Yeah, and the 3 men that he
It's
did
surreal.
murder were stabbed. But you say that he was a little bit different because most incels direct their anger, their fury, their plotting, their ideation at women.
It's toward women, and and that's the root of this whole sort of crime of withholding sex.
Yeah, so at the centre of this, I think, is cowardice. Because
Yeah,
incels fear other men,
yeah,
and they see women as subhuman.
yeah, absolutely.
But when an incel takes on a Chad, the Chad could be, in fact, the portrayal, the cliche, the stereotype of a Chad is around 6'2" and 100 kilograms. So your nerdy little incel's probably not going to take that guy on. So this is direct. So most of the anger is going to be directed at women and girls. This guy wanted to take them all on, the Vista attacker, which also shows his streak of narcissism and megalomania. But most of them stop short and just decide to lunge towards the gatekeepers of their misery, the women.
Yeah.
It is outrageous cowardice.
Yeah, it is. And like the incel community will call this piece of shit who committed these atrocities the supreme gentleman, which is something he called himself in his video, but also referred to him as a saint.
He's a saint, yes.
And now, look, this is not all incels. It really is. A lot of incels are miserable, sad guys who are sort of keeping to themselves, but it is widespread enough to be considered commonplace. It's incels also, this is one of the things that I find really disturbing about the way they discuss this sort of thing, is that incels seem to be more at odds with whether he was ugly enough to be a real incel or he was too rich to be an incel. But you very rarely hear these guys speaking of the dead with an empathetic response.
No, that's
because from my experience in this sort of subculture, life is cheap in the incel world. Life's cheap.
And the moral compass has been thrown out the window.
Yeah, 100%.
So a number of jurisdictions actually refer to these sorts of attacks, the ones that we've described earlier, and there are many others, as terrorism. The Federal Bureau of Investigation. I mean, well, part of the problem is, and you would think this was a fairly simple exercise, but there is a global struggle. United Nations and various sort of global groups have struggled to define it. Australia has its own legal definition of terrorism. They vary quite widely. I mean, the Federal Bureau of Investigation defines terrorism as the unlawful use of force or violence against persons or property to intimidate or coerce a government, the civilian population, or any segment thereof in furtherance of political or social objectives. That's a very broad definition. The Oxford English Dictionary, the OED definition, is the unlawful use of violence and intimidation, especially against civilians, in the pursuit of political aims. Now, that's not a legal definition, but the issue is these definitions have to be in place in order for intelligence agencies and law enforcement to kick in, because what we have is basically two sets of laws. Certainly in this country, we have a set of laws based on the Crimes Act and so forth, and then we have other laws that are related to terrorism. And the laws related to terrorism allow a greater scope for police or law enforcement investigations, monitoring, moderation, that sort of thing that don't exist normally. So in Australia, because I suppose, Joel, you might address this, that the incel community here is regarded as sort of beyond politics or apolitical. Perhaps that's why they don't tick all the boxes.
Yeah, well, it's one of those things where I find interesting to say the social objectives that they say in the paragraph there, because look, when it comes down to it, there's the social objective is so ambiguous. What is it? Like, if you kill a few attractive women, suddenly attractive women are going to start screwing incels to try and prevent the next attack. And honestly, this is the kind of shit they sometimes come up with.
Well, it's thoroughly, sort of just wrapped in irrationality.
They'll say things like, you fuck all these men. Why don't you just spend one of those on an incel and stop the next shooting attack? And they will say this shit, and in their heads it checks out, because if you fuck an incel, Stacey fucks an incel, incel, and she saves, 10 civilians.
She's not going to be saving the world, is she? I mean, but basically,
It's just ridiculous.
If we look at that FBI definition, the unlawful use of force or violence against persons or property, tick, to intimidate or coerce a government, the civilian population or any segment thereof, tick, in furtherance of political or social objectives.
Social, yep.
Yeah, I mean, look, they might be blind to objectives. They, we just talked about, some of the madness, but
a bit vague.
So really, we can see why they tend to slip under the radar. The Canadians believe they're a terrorist group, and they respond. Yeah, because a number of attacks have occurred in
Toronto.
Canada.
Yes, we'll get to that later.
And we'll talk about one of those later. I mean, look, I read a piece in The Conversation published earlier this year, written by two academics, one female, one male, both from the US, arguing that we shouldn't define incel attacks as terrorism on the sort of spurious grounds that they were not sort of intricately planned, like 9/11, with plotting and conspiracies going on for a year beforehand. That,
people still fucking
that these were more like lone wolf attacks, not quite spontaneous, but with no particular planning going behind them.
There's a social objective there.
The rest of the article veers into arguments of big state overreach on terrorism investigations, which I have some sympathy with. But for mine, we are dealing with a terrorist organisation for the fundamental reason that they terrorise a group within our society, and a large group at that, and that's women.
Absolutely. And this is the sort of thing where, we juggle and we struggle and we will go with all this sort of thing of what is the line between freedom and security and all this sort of stuff. And you'll get your libertarians chiming in, you'll get conspiracy theorists saying other things. There's all the fucking voices in the world on this. But at the end of the day, I'm not sure when the next incel attack is coming, but it is going to happen. And whether this means incels are inherently evil, whether the communities are evil, blah, 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 that's a whole nother conversation for people who probably have more diplomas than I do. But at the very root of it, this is a problem that remains unsolved and will result if the trajectory continues, unless somehow the latest craze in incel ideology becomes being completely reasonable and they all start thinking that it's cool to, condemn violence. Good luck with that. Until then,
Yeah, I mean, the next attack is
it's when, not if.
It's when, not if. And at that time, the media will, furrow its brow and wonder what we're going to do about it.
There'll be a whole uptick in news stories on incels, and then it'll come back down, and they'll continue not getting laid, and they'll continue being pissed off about it, and the world will keep fucking spinning.
Well, we want to try and give our listeners a bit more understanding of this of this bizarre subculture. Joel, you might want to give our listeners an insight of some of its darkest players. Who the leaders are, who the thought leaders are.
I'll give you one. We're going to extremes on this one, so I'm just going to give you the one real standout, which is this absolutely terrifying figure in the incel community named Nathan Larson. This guy is a fucking piece of work. It is not at all defamatory to call this guy a Nazi pedophile. He would probably agree with you because he's not even an incel. He ran an incel forum with this clear intent to radicalize them into violence, specifically violence against women. And I mean sexual, explicit, horrific violence against women. This guy's not an incel. He's been married twice. And terrifyingly enough, someone who has been very open about how he thinks it's okay to basically sexually assault children, has a daughter that's thankfully not in his custody, but still, fuck, that is harrowing.
Yeah. So what we're talking about is this, the extreme right libertarian type view of the world, right?
Yeah. Oh, this guy, he's run for Congress as a libertarian.
It's that sort of amoral, anything
100%.
goes. Yeah.
Yeah. And the thing is, of course, no one's a victim except for themselves, and whatever you do, you're entitled to. This is the thing when it comes to male entitlement. I mean, it's thrown around a lot, but in this situation, this guy embodies it. Now, he was jailed for making threats on the head of both Barack Obama and George W. Bush, which personally, I'm almost impressed by, because it shows this bizarrely bipartisan approach to murdering heads of state. Usually that runs across party lines. But while this would have usually prevented him from running for office, the law was amended in Virginia to allow felons to seek public office once again.
So he had a crack. How'd he get on?
Yeah, well, he got 2% of the vote, so good on him. But look, he actively
Two
encourages
percent,
incels.
2% is actually concerning, isn't it? I mean,
Well,
there's 98% who haven't, but there's 2% there who have either donkey voted or gone, I like the cut of this man's jib.
I reckon it's probably mostly donkey votes, to be honest, or just people who saw him as a libertarian and like libertarianism. I think, if anything, the libertarian vote would have been higher, but his profile would have been
Right.
dragged through the
Yeah,
mud during
that
the
makes
lead up to
sense.
the election.
I mean,
But
what was he telling people? I mean, what's his thing?
he's straight up, like, he actively encourages pedophilia in all sorts of forms, and that was his legislative agenda. But he genuinely encourages incels to rape women, and I mean, like, properly. Hey guys, you should do this, not nudge,
for the
like a
full
push.
rollout. Yeah.
Oh fuck yeah! And like, this is because they're entitled to sex, and this is the thing that they, people on the left especially love to talk about. Incels are entitled to sex, blah blah blah. And a lot of times this doesn't play out the way they like to say it. In this situation, it absolutely fucking does. This guy wrote and actively promoted a 3,000-word essay on how to psych yourself up to feel entitled to rape. And this guy is not like a hero of the incel community, unlike, the saint, the supreme gentleman.
Yeah.
But he certainly has infected a few hearts and minds along the way. He is an evil, awful piece of shit.
And it's worthwhile suggesting, it's worthwhile that we discuss the sort of mentality that's active through incels. I mean, they consider themselves perpetual victims. So that they come from almost an underclass of people. And so they are incredibly vulnerable to suggestion. Yeah. I mean, people like Larson prey on that.
Absolutely. They're looking for father figures everywhere.
When you say vulnerable to suggestion, they don't seem very vulnerable to the suggestion of not being a rapist.
Yes.
Or a Nazi or a pedophile or a creepy or a creepy starer on a bus seat, Yeah. They seem much less receptive on the basic idea of being a decent person, much less receptive to the notion of a basic human decency.
Yeah, just imagine if the latest incel craze was to be like, not a fuckwit. That would just be like, it'd fix the problem.
Be nice to people.
Yeah, so basically we have a bunch of outcasts in society with nothing to lose being told by a sketchy pedophile Nazi that they should rape women in the street. And that, I don't know, call me crazy. It's not good. It's not good. How the fuck do we stop this from going from just an internet forum, words on a page, to this sort of grisly reality that we've seen in the headlines?
So we know our agencies in this country, intelligence agencies and enforcement, are really not keeping an eye on these guys. Other countries have varied, and they do include them as terrorist groups, and therefore bring that terrorist legislation and that money and resources into enforcement and monitoring. Mm-hmm. So what we see with the incels are the sort of lone wolf type spree attacks that are that are meat and drink of terrorism. They're very difficult to police. But every available bit of information tells us that our intelligence services aren't keeping a close eye on them because they're not listed as a terrorist organisation. They don't pick that political box. They have an amorphous structure. Yeah.
These guys know how to use a VPN. They're not like the 60-year-old guys who get arrested in Thailand for massive child sex offences, because those guys don't know how to use a fucking internet. That's how they get caught. And these guys, they can cover their tracks.
Yeah. And very, very difficult, very, very difficult to even have an understanding of, perhaps with the exception of people in the forensic psychology community who may be obliged to prepare assessments on those people in the court.
And that's when it's too late, obviously. Yeah. I mean, if they're involved, that's because something's happened, not because it's happening. It's preventative sort of law enforcement that we're looking here. We're appealing to, almost saying that we need to keep an eye on these guys, despite how difficult it is. Let's face it, it's much more after the fact than before.
Yeah, look, that's right. I just wanted to talk about incels and how we might sort of fixate on mass attacks where multiple victims are murdered or injured.
Yeah, they make the headlines.
They make the headlines, but this crime certainly did make headlines. This was the murder of Eurydice Dixon in Princess Park in Melbourne in June 2018. Yeah, so Eurydice Dixon is a comedian and actress, decided she was going to walk home. I believe she was living in Northcote, so she was cutting through Princess Park on her way home, and
from a gig.
After a gig, that's right.
A stand-up gig.
And her perpetrator, who we won't name, we think he may well be an incel. Now, the first thing to say about that is there's no evidence, right? There's no evidence presented at court. And there's no evidence presented at court for a very, very good reason. That is, if he was a babbling incel, his defence counsellor says, look, we're not going to be introducing that as evidence. We're not going to pop you in the box where you can start babbling about how you've been dudded by women and that's why you did this, because obviously that's going to lead to a longer sentence. So, there is the evidence that was presented was that the perpetrator was on the spectrum, and that in itself is a bit of a concern because it sort of leads people to believe that people suffering autism might commit these sorts of offences, and there's really no background to that.
I found that problematic at the time.
But if we look at this through the incel prism, if you like, this seems to tick all the boxes of an incel event.
It does.
Yeah. So the perpetrator followed Eurydice home
after the gig. Yeah.
Now there's no evidence. In fact, he wasn't in attendance that evening at Eurydice's.
It's believed he's familiar with her work, though, and it's believed that she was targeted as a result.
It's very likely that he's seen her act. And tell us a little bit about how you describe Eurydice's act.
Well, essentially, it's that sort of outspoken feminist, edgy political sort of commentary. And look, honestly, I haven't heard any of her act in practice. But what I have heard from sort of third-hand things is that he was aware of the content of this act and his sort of misogynistic leanings. Yeah, he basically wanted to show this uppity woman who was speaking actively about feminism, show her place.
That's right.
Put her in her place.
So that's right. So this does have all the hallmarks of a sort of incel type attack.
100%. It's the same thing with sort of DV and stuff like that, where there is a power situation where someone who feels powerless wants to exercise this kind of power, and they will do anything to make sure that power is nailed in, even if it comes to murder. They need to maintain that power, even all the way to the fucking clink. I mean, it's pathetic, but it's textbook, and it happens a lot.
One of the issues that arose, and something we'll deal with a little bit later, but one of the issues that arose around the murder of Eurydice Dixon was that there was this response, and it sort of happened on Talkback Radio, and it happened in the sort of comment sections of newspapers, and often expressed by older people that she had, almost justified the attack on her by walking at night. That she was behaving unsafely. So can we just put that shit to bed away, please? Yeah. I mean, anyone who believes that bullshit is a complete fuckwit. I mean, the very notion of having a society or a community that we live in is that men, women, everyone should not just be safe, but feel safe.
100%.
And this is where we get back to incels, because incels, at their heart, do not make particularly women feel safe.
No, really not. And
look, one of the sort of corners of their discussions, these sort of bulletin board bullshit chats that they have, and then there's a whole raft of other communications that occur that we don't know. That aren't recorded, that are IM type discussions that occur between these fellows.
Absolutely.
There's incitement going on, isn't there? There's incitement to commit offences. Now, when we look at terrorist legislation, anyone who incites or plan or assists or encourages a terrorist event in this country falls under that terrorist organisation. Falls under that terrorist legislation, and is subject to the great resources of the state being sent to investigate them. But when we look at this, and you've looked at it more broadly than I, Joel, when we look at the sorts of discussions that are going on, we see words like mass rape, We see words like acid attacks. We see words, common descriptions of murders, ideating murders, etc., within the incel community. And a lot of this stuff is just going unnoticed. I mean, it is, by any reasonable assessment, criminal behaviour.
Oh, there's no doubt that the amount of things we attribute to incel ideology, whether it be fermented by this kind of community of forums, or whether it comes from just that feeling of isolation and misery that makes its own kind of monster. There is no way that all the things that we do, if we Google incel attack or incel murder, that's not the full list. There is a shitload. Surely, and the thing is, these are the ones that make it to court, that even get into the media,
and that are defined as incel attacks, and there's a lot that aren't. I mean,
a lot.
You talked about the Isla Vista attack and the cheers that sprang out from the incel community.
Saint fucking yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, in this country, I'll be fucked if any of those people shouldn't be closely monitored, because they are really dangerous.
Totally. And we've got, the van attack, as we mentioned before, in Toronto.
Yes.
That asshole killed 10 people and injured 16. This is indiscriminate killing to prove that social objective. It makes no fucking sense. But he's a confirmed incel, and he is revered on the forums as a hero by a lot of people, because canonizing mass murderers is textbook incel behavior. It's one of their worst fucking traits. I mean, let's face it, there's a lot to choose from. But the thing is, there is a lot more calls to action than actual actions in the incel community, which is somewhat reassuring, because there's this hilarious sort of, Venn diagram of uselessness and calls to action, where they kind of famous for, Dorito dust covered fingers, basement dwellers in their parents' place.
Yeah.
If they were more motivated and these people were more, equipped, shit could go wrong. But let's face it only takes one of these people to rip a community apart. And for what?
Yes. To what ends? Yeah. I mean,
That's right.
Maybe when we're looking at this sort of terrorist definition vis-a-vis incels, we're sort of going down an intellectual cul-de-sac. And what we really should be wondering is how these men sit in their dark rooms, idealising toxic misogyny for 10 to 12 hours a day, how these men relate to the world on the occasions they engage in it. The stereotype of the man of the overweight guy in his parents' basement. There might be some reality to that, but at some point they're going to have to close the door. Incels close the front door behind them and walk out in the big wide world. Incels are not agoraphobics.
Not all of them.
And then the question is, and this is really where we want to get to, how they regard the women they might see on the bus, how they engage with co-workers, and what horrible thoughts they almost always will keep to themselves, but what horrible thoughts that they're bringing to those relationships, and then discussing them with those of like mind in dark corners of the internet. Yeah. And when they do engage with a woman, whether it's the woman sitting next to them on the bus seat or whether it's the co-worker, the engagement is always at a sexualised level, implicit or otherwise. They are making assessment of that person, not as a human being, but as a gatekeeper, as you said before. A person,
they dehumanise them as a routine.
Yeah. A person with a vagina and thus someone to be despised. And that's the biggest
tool of utility.
Yeah, that's right. That's the biggest threat incels pose for mine, whether it's, just a creepy stare on a bus, and these fuckers or non-fuckers, I should say, make a significant contribution to why women feel unsafe on our streets.
Yeah, and rightly so, to be fair. I mean, look, I have seen this openly discussed on incel forums. Touching up women on crowded public transport is totally a thing.
Yes, we call that frottage. That's a particular fetish, yes.
What a visceral word that is. Frottage.
I believe it's French. The French, there's nothing they don't know about sexual perversion.
Yeah, truly.
With the possible exception of the Japanese.
Yes, they seem quite keen on this whole activity, apparently. Look, this is the kind of thing that is not getting headlines. This is not on public domain. This is not even reaching court cases for the most part.
Look, it must be said that frottage is not just played by incels. There's a whole other level of perversity associated.
Oh yeah, fair
with
game,
it,
fair game.
But what we are talking about is an indecent assault.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is the stuff, like we say, like, we have all these mass shootings, they get in the headlines.
Yeah.
These are the things that happen in day-to-day society that I think are glazed over. And like, we've got also things like acid attacks, which are sort of like a traditionally sort of Middle Eastern sort of thing they see as
very
being
popular amongst the Hindu community in India, yes, as well.
Yeah. And it's like one of those things that these guys just love the idea of, making women go down to their level. I mean, I read once on a forum that a guy overheard a woman in his office saying that she didn't know which of the guys she was dating at the time she wanted to continue seeing.
Right.
This made his blood boil. And he said that he was going to accidentally trip over and spill boiling hot black coffee on her face so none of them would want her. Now, did he do this is a question that I genuinely don't know the answer to. And I mean, the best I can come up with is maybe.
Well, in the end, whether it happened or not, the fact that this fellow was ideating it, and then expressing that to a community of like-minded weirdos,
it's not fucking great.
Dangerous in itself. So, look, tell me, Joel, what makes an incel? What sets them apart?
Yeah, well, this is the thing, like the whole thing isn't without basis because they're either ugly or short, broke, dumb, socially awkward, all of these shitty traits. Some of them come from broken homes, and many of them work in absolutely terrible jobs, pumping gas sort of stuff that, doesn't really work well on a Tinder profile.
They're an encyclopedia of human flaws.
They really are. They absolutely are. And while most people tend to get along in society, they find their place and they sort of relax, they almost purposefully dwell on the fringe. Yeah. And a common trope with incels is that we all know a short, ugly, weird, broke guy with a cute girlfriend or a girlfriend at all, blah, blah, blah. And this is great and all, but they do not want to hear this. This fucking triggers them. It makes them rage.
Well, look, I've got to say, look, ugliness, we need to talk about ugliness. I mean, it is one of those things that we don't talk about very often. I mean, the people we tend to see on television generally aren't ugly. The people who read our news bulletins and so forth. But ugliness surely, like beauty, is in the eye of the beholder. And so this is really an intent. This grievance, this is something that they're comfortable with. They're comfortable with the grievance. They're comfortable with the irrational hatreds. They're comfortable in that zone. It's not necessarily about physical ugliness, is it?
Yeah, I see what you mean. Look, some of it's mental. A lot of these guys argue they're socially awkward or they've got anxiety disorders and things like that. But it often comes back to aesthetics. But I do believe there is a halo effect. And I do believe if you go to a boardroom, you will find mostly conventionally attractive people, mostly white, but that's another story we need to deal with. But these are the kind of people that tend to make it. And the guy who looks like the Elephant Man doesn't tend to get past interview process. And I see where they're coming from with that. But at the same time, there's this dysmorphia within these ranks because, as you say, it can be in the beholder. And if you see a picture of some of these guys, some of them, mate, I genuinely think that their looks are a disability because they are fucking hideous. But some of them just really aren't. They're just not that bad.
So there's a contentment there, sitting away in a darkened room. Yeah, and a contentment. They're even more relaxed about their sort of violent ideations.
Well, I mean, this sort of stuff becomes commonplace for them because they get into these communities. And these communities, they're like an incel universe. They have their own dictionaries. They have their own language. Yeah. Like, as we said before, we slipped Chad in there. Chads are attractive white men, basically.
Yes,
and attractive black men are Tyrones because everything's fucking divided by race. Right. And attractive women are Stacys. And then this is great. They stratify this by having the slightly less attractive and usually more intelligent women called Beckys.
Yeah, Beckys, yeah.
And it's fucking idiots like that. They call women femoids or femoids. I actually don't. I see it so much in text. I don't really hear it.
I presume it's femoids. I think, we just
I think so, yeah.
Got to get the old phonic rules onto that one. That'll be femoids.
But it's a dehumanizing term.
That's right. So that's... and the lexicon too. So a man is a Chad. He's not a Peter or a Joel. He's a Chad.
Hey, I will have you know, I am a Chad light.
I'm a pretty good guy. I'm a pretty good looking guy. But so it's all about dehumanize.
It is.
That's the way it is. So it's easier, much, much easier to commit violent attacks, or even just think about them and express them on the net when you can stereotype people so easily.
Just dehumanize them. The sort of misogyny they practice here and the sort of self-loathing they practice as well has all of these cute terms to make it sort of, kind of like a little sort of like a lighter than it really is. But see, one of the things they like to say is neat, which is NEET.
Yes.
And they often are this, not in education, employment, or training, which I think is actually from Thatcher. And if they are employed, they refer to themselves or others as wage cucks because they're being, submissively forced into the workplace. Because the ultimate goal of a true incel who makes it to wizardry and really gets there is to LDAR, which is lay down and rot.
Well, in terms of an intimate relationship, who wouldn't get soft at the knees at the thought of a sexual partner who's a fat-ass couch potato without ambition, without a plan for advancement, and carries a burning sense of grievance against all women and the men who relate to them as human beings?
Well, if that gives you the shits, here's a few things that might get you nice and riled up about our incel mates, because incel mates have a huge sticking point when it comes to promiscuity. They are fixated on how many partners women have had, and they actively seek out virgins. And this can get real fucking weird, because this leans toward the fetishization of teenagers. I mean, that's where most virginity lies.
Yeah.
So they think that sex with multiple partners destroys vaginas.
I mean,
there's no basis for this. It's disgusting.
No, whatsoever. I mean, but they call it roast beef.
Yes, they do.
They call the vagina roast beef, yeah.
And that's why they label promiscuous women as, they call them roasties. And they make all these memes of roast beef sandwiches that resemble the labia and things like that. And it's just fucking creepy.
Oh, that's extremely creepy. And it tells us, most of all, these guys hate vaginas.
Fuck, they do. That is a good point. They kind of do. Like, if you look at this shit, that's kind of nailed it on the head.
Yeah, there's some extraordinary psychology going on there, and
bizarre,
and it's based largely in ignorance. I mean,
yes, there is practical ignorance, isn't it?
The great moment in The Office when Dwight goes to the HR guy and wants him to explain where the clitoris is.
Oh, nice.
So there's all of that.
That's it.
I mean, this is a loathing. This is not a simple curiosity. If you've actually never seen one in the wild,
and you're angry at it,
and that's their default position. It's just to be angry at it,
Yeah, what a bizarre reality.
Yeah.
Fuck, that is a very interesting thing. So, look, and another one that I think is fuck, these guys are painful sometimes. Ridiculous traditional gender roles. I mean, women are at the house, they're subservient, and the men are the leaders of the house and that sort of thing, which, let's face it, isn't very fucking relevant because you're not in a relationship, champion. You can't even get a fucking root. So this obviously revolves around control, and at least it seems so. Look, I'm not a psych, but they often say things like conservative religions, conservative Islam, Orthodox Judaism, they've got it right because they have a patriarchal society that makes a lot of sense. And this plays into this whole Jordan Peterson idea of traditional gender roles because let's face it, Jordan Peterson's equation on inceldom, which got a lot of press when there was a few shootings and things like that, is the idea that if there is a monogamous structure of abstinence and one partner for life, then it's more likely that a 50-50 split is going to happen and incels are going to get a mate. Because basically, somehow society is going to force women to fuck nutcases, and then of course you can imagine what happens behind closed doors in that relationship. I mean, these fucking cretins are textbook DV, textbook. So great fucking solution.
Well, look, they're comfortable where they are. They hate vaginas. I mean, the very notion that they're going to engage in a sort of profound emotional experience of a relationship with a woman or indeed another man, it's just bizarre, isn't it? I mean, the idea that if we ratcheted everything back to the 50s, where we lived in a far more male-controlled society, that incels wouldn't exist. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
That's bullshit. Yeah, that's foolish.
But they hate the sexual revolution. They hate the empowerment of women. And the moral conservatism, it's actually reactionary. It says they have a better chance of being normies back in the good old days when men ruled the roost.
Yes, and didn't have to do shit to be anyone.
Yeah, when in reality these people are so socially awkward that they're not going to have relationships anyway.
No, they would have been the guy that shot up the post office regardless of what they did, let's face it. But, it is a throwback to that thing of like, it's the same thing with having nothing to lose. I mean, you look at these sort of throwbacks and you think, well, I've got nothing to lose now. Imagine what it would have been like back then. Maybe better. I mean, fuck, it's better than nothing, right?
Well, what other miserable grievances do incels carry around?
Fuck, I could go on about this for about 3 hours. But there is a huge competition between what makes you less desirable in the incel community. There is ugly face, there's being short, there's being socially awkward or otherwise somewhat mentally impaired. And they do have, documented illnesses behind this. Right. But they compete to be the most disadvantaged.
So the winner is the loser.
Absolutely. And this is so similar to the identity politics bullshit, or like the competition of being the most marginalized, you know? Yeah. But the thing is when you're in the ID poll circles, the most marginalized suddenly becomes fucking canonized and everyone's like, oh my God, you're so brave. Whereas there's no prize for this in the incel community. People in incel forums, when you win this battle of wits as to how fucking awful you are, they'll just turn around and go, okay, cool. Well, you should probably kill yourself and here's how you should do it.
So this is the thing. They actually urge suicide.
Oh yeah,
among their own members, and particularly if you are an incel who's basically lost the competition. No, sorry, won the competition.
Yes,
but no prize. Because they're the most awful people, awful men.
Subhuman. Genetic fuck up, the whole bit, circumstantial.
Time for them to grab a length of rope.
Call it a day.
And this is common, apparently. They will urge suicide commonly in bulletin boards and elsewhere, yeah?
Absolutely. And the thing is, when someone says they're going to kill themselves, it comes to a mixed reaction. Sometimes people do say, maybe don't do it, blah, blah, blah. But most of the reactions are good luck, or what has become a bit of a meme expression, which is, goodbye, sweet prince.
Oh, dear.
And watching that in text, it just says, just do it. And people will, announce their departure, not unlike Pete Evans on Facebook. And some of them do it and some of them don't. Yeah. Pete Evans on Facebook doesn't do it. Some of these guys, they really do. They call it. And sometimes they're in the news.
And again, it's very, very difficult to get any sort of range of data, extrapolated data on in this country, but you would think they're making up quite a lot of numbers. I mean, look,
it is. Yeah,
I think it's important to say that you and I both have empathy for people who suffer genuine human loneliness, right? I mean,
absolutely.
We're social animals, and those that have difficulty socialising with the group deserve, our understanding. But this isn't it. This is almost willful.
Yeah,
it doesn't make any sense.
Well, once you identify as an incel, you become a part of the community. And while they are all different, because I do want to make sure that this isn't like that weird Antifa thing of like making this amorphous blob of people into one thing, but at the same time, there is a general community and they do seem to rally around the idea and almost celebrate the idea of being incels. But on the paradoxical side of that, they seek to ascend, as they call it, to find love and to, and sometimes they will have departure notice saying, I made it, boys. Usually they're in their early 20s because they should never have been fucking incels in the first place. But like they'll say, look, I talked to a girl and she actually said yes and now we're hanging out and like, I think this is it for me, guys. See you later. And some of them respond really nicely.
Yeah.
And some of them respond with like, she'll leave, this is a matter of time. Like, how many guys has she fucked before you? Like, so it's a fascinating thing.
It's if you're having a first relationship with a woman, this is not what you need. You do not want to be in that particular group because that'll just...
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
I'll fuck with your head.
I mean, look, we talked about politically. We talked about, where they might sit on a linear sort of ideological framework. But, I've seen a lot, a lot you would say that from the extreme right, lots of the Red Hat Brigade, lots of alt-right stuff. But is that the case or is it like spread across the place?
Look, it's a broad church because it seems like that on face value. It seems very Red Hat because a lot of these guys are actually, bizarrely enough, really big on universal basic income because this enables them to lay down and rot. So, and incels...
They've appropriated socialism because
it's very funny.
It'll prevent them from having to go out in the world and get a job.
100%. And like Andrew Yang, who is the big proponent of the universal basic income, was like most of his platform. And Incels rallied behind him, Yang Gang, the whole thing, made memes and shit because he was promising incels neat
Free
bucks,
money.
which is
Free money.
it's their slang for welfare cash.
Neat
Neat
bucks
being
is
not an
free
education
money,
and training
yeah.
and money. And this is the thing, because like most of the incels that love Trump are just edgelords from 4chan.
Yeah, I want to talk about them. Yeah, so
Yeah.
what we can say also about incels that makes them even more dangerous is that there's an infiltration from far right groups, neo Nazis, and what have you. Because,
Yeah, we had
as we
Larson.
said before, incels are impressionable, and when you
Yeah.
get angry, heavily armed men coming into their bulletin boards, urging them to do things, bad things are going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the sort of thing that you find. That's the thing you sort of find, it does play out. But the interesting thing with incels is that most of their take on race and things like that, which is where this sort of race baiting tends to lead them towards some sort of neo-Nazi ideology, it all becomes down to bloody sexual hierarchy because they stratify their take on identity politics in a sexual hierarchical fashion, which is kind of funny in a way. So there's this whole thing about which race has it worst. And it's almost universally known within the incel community that whites have it easiest. And there's an acronym they call JBW, just be white. And this whole just be white thing really pisses off the white incels who really don't feel like their lonely, sad existence needs to check its fucking privilege.
Yeah.
But it's not white supremacy. It is a byproduct of racism on the dating scene. And it's a very real phenomenon. When I was on Tinder, I saw people that said straight up in their fucking profiles, no Asians, no Indians. This has got to be a fraction of the people that actually think that, who are prepared to say it in text, and the rest just swipe left on anyone who isn't white.
Yeah, look, Tinder profiling dates, I mean, on all those sort of dating sites, there's a whole mess of them nowadays. I mean, basically for their programmers to create a category based on race is really problematic, because it's not really helpful.
I think that happened on Grindr, actually. They had a race category, which it's just one of those ways of really enabling this kind of shitty behavior and locking people out of what is a multicultural social ecosystem. I mean, I'm not here to mandate preferences, but I'm sorry, but, this kind of explicit racism is something that we shouldn't be just accepting as a part of 2020. It's just fucking terrible. I mean, there are studies on this, and I've looked at them before.
Yeah, look, I'm very suspicious of studies into incels because, firstly, incels are suspicious themselves about researchers and journalists. They'll run them off.
They're a paranoid group.
They are drooling paranoids.
Which is fair because they do get victimized in the media a lot without their right of response. Right. So I get that.
So it would be extraordinarily difficult, even if there wasn't this sort of run-a-mile approach to analysis. And I dare say they don't want to be analysed because the answers would be pretty bloody grim. And the answers would form along the lines, from many of them, I'd say the overwhelming majority, probably as high as 90%, that you are suffering from a particular personality disorder.
Yeah.
So I'm very, very sceptical about studies that have been undertaken, not least because they'll run a mile from them, but also where they do engage, that I doubt that they're going to be very, very honest about it.
Yeah, and that's fair enough. But look, I think one of the things that's really important to highlight here is the fact that the reality of incels, whether they ascend or not, it's the average lifespan of an incel is one that is much shorter than the general population, because the natural conclusion to an incel's life is suicide.
Yes.
It just is. And this is something that is widely known throughout the communities. And when they get to that point, especially if they get past 30, which makes them a wizard, they stop caring for themselves. They give up on life, which means, they get type 2 diabetes, they get all sorts of things. And, when they talk about the rope and when they do plan to kill themselves, like we said before, sometimes people will plead for them not to do it, but most of them just wish them well and give them advice on how to do it. Because to a true incel, a real OG incel, death is release. And most people hold back. This is fucking depressing because they don't want their parents to go through it. Or maybe they've got a cat and they don't want the cat to go to a shelter. Or maybe they've got a couple of friends they would feel that they'd be letting down by going. Especially other incel friends who, don't have other friends and, they're really isolated. Often they will say in explicit terms, I'm waiting for my parents to die and then I'm going to rope.
I'm waiting for my cat to die, so then
Waiting
I'll
for the
rope.
cat to go. Yeah, 100%. And it's just like these people are on the fucking edge.
You know, this is nihilism writ large. You know, it would be hard to imagine a more dangerous subculture. And if we were to sum up the threat of this, both to themselves and to others, it is there's nothing more dangerous than a man or men who have nothing to lose.
Yeah.
So what are we going to do about it, Joel? Is deplatforming one way?
Well, I mean, look, Reddit took off the Incel subreddit, which was a big move. And then they deleted various other Incel subreddits that sort of spawned from that sort of stuff. And the thing is, like, you know, they've got these, like, Incel forums. Some of the stuff that Larson was hosting, which were genuinely toxic, and Babe.net had this whole weird spat, and the content providers tend to kick them off. But it's interesting because I think in Facebook and I notice in Twitter, there's quite an active incel community and they're not being sort of, you know, stamped down on like QAnon and things like that. But I do feel like there's a bit of a midpoint. I think that there's toxic spaces and there's therapeutic spaces. And these people often don't have friends. They find mates in these forums.
And in any event, you know, when you start deplatforming, I mean, I think there are certain things that require deplatforming, and various individuals who should be deplatformed and have been deplatformed. But when you get a group like this, deplatforming is kind of like a game of whack-a-mole. You know, every hole you hit, you know, they're going to pop up somewhere else.
Oh, totally. And they're very technically adept as well. So a lot of subcultures that will, you know, like anti-vaxxers who are not known for being clever, once their favorite websites go down, they kind of stuck. Like, what do they do next? Where do I go? I don't know. Whereas incels will find their mates. But when they do shut down these forums and the community is lost, they do get atomized. And I'm absolutely convinced, and I have no evidence for this, but I'm absolutely sure that some of these kids have taken their lives once they lost all their mates in these places, or at least certain ones.
Yes.
I'm just sure of it because the thing is, this is the tricky thing because there is a greater good element to this and an overall long game as to whether deplatforming works.
That's how incels, we talked about this briefly, but that's how the incel community first started. It was really just a support group for those who were really battling and women and male memberships, you know, bounced around advice and support 100%. And encouragement. It just got toxic.
And this should have its place in society because love can be a battlefield. You know, like it's fucking hard. I've had troubles with myself, like, you know, meeting women and having anxiety and working through all these things. And over time, I've figured it out. And over time, I've learned and loved and all these sort of beautiful, wonderful things. But it can be fucking hard. And I feel for them, you know?
Yeah, but feeling socially awkward at 17 or 18 shouldn't drag you to these dark places.
Pretty fucking normal. I mean, the idea of, like, a lot of these incels do have like, a mental clarity of saying, look, kid, you're not meant to be here. You know, you're 17, shut the fuck up. And other ones will say, 17, you haven't kissed a girl. It's over.
I mean, this is almost you know, a constant in adolescence. I mean, that's just something that comes up, you know, that you're the square peg in the round hole. I mean, we all went through it.
Yeah.
But
here we've
got an avenue to much, much darker places. You know,
totally.
That's the old thing I say, the internet, you're never more than 4 clicks away from some really dangerous stuff.
True.
And this is, you know, I mean, these issues in adolescence are compounded around bullying, you know.
Yeah, see, not all childhoods are created equal. Like,
that's true.
You know, I had a great time at school. I had a beautiful girlfriend for 7 years when I was 15. I had all these amazing friends. All
right, Joel, that's enough.
Drank on the train.
About your manifest successes in life.
But it was
not
a
everyone's
good time.
Not everyone's like that.
Exactly. And this is why I feel like it's ridiculous for me as someone who's had this like really blessed time to say what's fucking wrong with you. Because some of these kids have been fucking tortured. Yeah. Bullying at school, seriously, almost every incel story you'll hear, the bullying at school. And it's usually something to do with their face or aesthetics or shortness or whatever. Abuse, both sexual and violent from parents, step-parents, and foster parents. Some of these kids are wards.
Yeah, that's the other thing we've barely touched on here. I would say that incels, almost without exception, would have problematic relationships with their parents.
Yeah, whether they even know them or not. The amount of foster situations and wards of the state in incel, the incidence there is much higher than the general community. No fucking doubt. Because the stories, there's so many of them. And like some of these guys have been put through a system that the list of mental illnesses they suffer from is longer than the fucking Nile. I mean, like, it gets really dark. But this is the thing, and my dad always said this when I was a kid. Your right to swing your fist ends at my nose. And when you start using this shit as an excuse to take what you want from women like they're some sort of fucking commodity, and using this as a platform to violate the space of others, look, I'm sorry, but I'm not in your corner at that point.
Absolutely right, Joel. It reminds me of a Monty Python sketch. There's a room full of people, sort of PG Wodehouse type salon. And in bounces Michael Palin and said, "There's been a murder." And John Cleese said, "I did it, but society's to blame." So Michael Palin arrests everybody else. You know what I mean? This we can't get to the point where the people who are actually ideating violence and on occasions that are very difficult to quantify actually engage in that violence against women. That these people should be seen somehow as victims. I mean, yes, life's tough. Yes, life can be a real bastard. And if you've been bullied mercilessly all your life, you're going to look for a place where will give you some succor. And I understand that. But at the end of the day, the greater good is going to be achieved by having our cities, our towns, safer places for women to be in. 50% of the population, it's actually 51 in Australia, 51% of the population feeling that they can walk our streets day or night and not be subject to appalling behaviour. I mean,
well, how do we get there? I mean, like, is the solution to ankle bracelet these fuckers? Are we going to, like, I think there is a lot of merit in the idea of a bottom-up kind of healing process where we give further awareness of anxiety and social disorders, and a lot of good people are doing a lot of good stuff in this space. But giving this sort of, acknowledgement of pain and treating this kind of thing with empathy and validity is the kind of response that I'd like to see. But honestly, I don't think you're going to be able to market hug a misogynist incel day.
I don't think it's going to work. I think this is going to be a stain on our society for a very, very long time. It's worldwide. It's not just a sort of Western white folk issue. It's going to cause a great stain. But if you want to pick a side, you always pick the side. I'm always going to pick the side that says I want our streets to be safer for women. I want our homes to be safer for women, and that's another issue. But I want our streets to, talk to women. As blokes, go and have a chat to a woman, and they'll tell you, I can't go out then. I can't go out then. It's night time.
That's fucked.
And
and these guys are a part of that.
And this subculture is a major contributor towards that. So
I think so.
If you're in it, get the fuck out of it. Pull your fucking head in. Pull your fucking socks up. Put your best fucking trousers on, and go and have a talk to someone on just at a basic human level. If you're not in it, try and understand it, but understand that this is a potentially lethally dangerous group of people running around with toxic fucking ideas that need to be stopped.
And don't underestimate them.
Never underestimate them.
No.
Well, I've had a gutful and I'm desperate to move on. The thought of these men and their deeply embarrassing unwanted erections is putting me off my beer.
Yeah, not me, Jack.
We need to get going to a segment. Got a lot of tongues wagging in DC. It's entirely possible Donald Trump is listening in because he wants to be a better dad, but he can't because his own father was an aloof sociopath with a penchant for popping the Manchester on and setting fire to a few crucifixes in the backyard. Yep. But Donnie wants to help because he knows young Eric, who is a good-looking boy, feels like he's a
bastard on Father's Day. So what's Eric been up to? What have you got for me, Jack?
Well, let's go back, Joe, way back to a telling remark Eric made in October last year where he showed himself to be not just a good-looking boy, but a man of vision when he complained, why is it that every family goes into politics and enriches themselves? He was talking about the Bidens, but it does seem to have an eerie reminiscence to the Trump family who've been making a nice quid in the hotel and country club business, no blacks or Jews, please, since the Great Orange one took the oath all the way back in January 2017. Has Eric forecast a series of felony raps for the Trump family, including himself? Will the emoluments clause or the Hatch Act come into play? Will Eric's frequent flyer miles on Air Force One come back to bite him hard on his handsome ass?
Will the Donald pardon Eric in advance for his numerous breaches of the Hatch Act, skipping in and out of the country on Air Force One to pop over to Africa and shoot some big game like a leopard or a giraffe? It's very naughty. Nobody likes that.
He's a good-looking boy, as we all know,
Yeah.
and frankly, I think he'd make a lot of friends at Fort Leavenworth, so I think Eric might still come up trumps. But we can't spend time living a life of regret over that terrible punch-hole. We have to get on and get to a segment that I know our listeners await with breaths bated. Possibly Ratsack, I can't be sure, but hanging on our every word of this, the week in Pete Evans.
It's been a very big week in Pete Evans, as you can imagine. I mean, now there is an obvious issue coming up next, but I want to lead with this. Pete has had the saddest book launch in modern history.
Oh, no.
I mean, on Tuesday, he made a post on all his platforms, including ones he may have said he was deleting, that his latest book had launched, but it didn't launch because his publishers have cancelled him because he's a Nazi. Bye-bye.
So he made a post suggesting that maybe, just maybe, a stockist might be carrying it. This, despite the fact that Pan Macmillan had made it clear that they were terminating the relationship, and according to his own words, they are not keeping in touch after the breakup. In traditional Pete fashion, he equated this to book burning due to the injustice of him being cancelled, and then used the post to plug his next book on cooking with cannabis, which I'm looking out for. Predictable Pete is a man of habit if he is anything. Complain, imply, victimhood, and promote.
That's our man, Pete. He knows what he's doing. So in other news, on November the 20th at 4:13 p.m., Pete Evans announced his departure from Facebook. Now, he's clearly tired of being oppressed and shadow banned by the whole Zuckerberg empire. He has no evidence for this claim whatsoever, but he makes it all the time. And now he's moving to the greener pastures of Parler.
He's going to love it there. So Parler, otherwise known as Fashbook, is a place where oppressed conservative voices can go and spread misinformation and racist garbage without fear of censorship. It's like a little Nazi utopia where nobody tells you what to do. And surely this is kind of ironic, considering that people delete and block any comments that do not agree with him or anything that questions his narrative. I mean, let's face it, censorship is only bad when you're not the one doing it.
That's right. Yep. Always be on the lighter side of the book burning. So on November 21st at 9:12 a.m., Pete Evans said he had deleted his Facebook. Now, of course, if you delete your Facebook, nobody can actually see your dramatic departure notice saying you've deleted Facebook. So basically what you have to do when you delete Facebook is you say you're deleting Facebook, but you leave it up for a little window so everyone can see your tantrum, and then you delete Facebook. But Pete missed a step.
And since posting on Facebook that he had deleted his Facebook, Persistent Pete has posted on Facebook 13 times. His complaint about a fake Pete Evans profile on Parler, proving very early that free speech can backfire. He also suggested a recipe with rose petals, famously covered in the kind of pesticides he thinks give you cancer, plugged his Evolve subscription page, and one of the few sponsors that stuck by him, the water filter dudes. Also, the usual recipes and anti-vax drivel that he is known for.
He also posted some Tracy Chapman lyrics, which I think reminded us all of when we got broken up with in high school and started finding sentimental value in all these old songs after stealing a bottle of vodka from Dad's liquor cabinet, replacing the bit you drink with some water, thinking you're pretty sneaky, and getting all sentimental about the lyrics. I mean, look, you know, you had your little Discman there and you maybe shed a little bit of a tear, but God, thank Christ we didn't have Facebook back then. Just imagine what would be on public record. I mean, the one thing that I'll tell you that did not happen in this week in Pete Evans is him deleting his Facebook page.
Well, next week is another week in Pete Evans, but I certainly doubt anything much will change on this front. Another attention-seeking tantrum from a man famous for throwing his toys out of the cot. Hopefully he kicks things up a notch, though. There's a while Pete Evans posting mega trash and self-promoting stuff still amuses. I want to see our man from Mullum go full butterfly on his Telegram and Parler accounts. He has a few hot takes on the Great Reset in there, but nobody seems to give a shit about that. Come on, Petey. We know you have it in you.
Yeah, mate, you can do it. You're supposed to change, aren't you, mate? Tell us everything you know about the real history of Germany.
We're looking forward to that. You have been listening to the Conditional Release program with your host, Jack, the Insider, and Joel Hill. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button. And if you've enjoyed our bullshit, throw us a 5-star review on your podcast app.
Jack can be found on Twitter at @JackTheInsider and Joel on @CrunchyMoses with a K. We've set up a Facebook page you can find pretty easily. Use the search function, come on, grow up. If you want more on incels, look up Hope, Cope and Rope on Google. You'll find my Medium article. And if you've got a little bit of a pressing for time, there's a shorter one called What Becomes of the Unfuckable, a shorter guide to the incel community, which is also found
That's a
on
very
Medium.
nice Pete Evans action there, Joel. Well done. And finally...
I also have a cookbook.
Finally, yes, it's only a matter of time before you got a cookbook out.
I cook incels.
Finally, all feedback, tips and death threats should be sent to the conditional release program at gmail.com. We would love to hear from you, even if it's simply to tell us we were about to be bukakied half to death by insane incels suffering from a bad case of dangerous sperm build-up.
Ooh, dangerous.
See you guys.
Thanks, listeners. See you later.